we spoke to this yesterday, but also looking at Australia's position in the geographical region here in Asia, and the fact that both Japan and incredibly China have set really aggressive targets to be, I think China carbon neutral, I think it was by 2050. And that really struck me this week about how these positions are reversing. So 25 years ago, it was, Australia pushing product and knowledge to China and taking their students, and all of that is reversing this year. So now China is leading in terms of addressing their climate challenges. Their students are no longer coming, and looking ahead to a future where we have a very, very weakened Australia in the region.
Yeah, absolutely, particularly if we choose not potentially to seize the moment. And I think this is an important insight that we've been coming to. If we genuinely reach a state, say, I don't know, by March next year, where we really do understand at national scale how to, inside our borders, if you like, maintain some level of COVID safety, where we don't have to be as concerned about large-scale lockdowns, then there's real opportunity to lead around these issues, right? Because the rest of the world is still going to be very distracted by the ups and downs of a virus that's raging out of control. So it's like, it's a moment for Australia to rise in a new way if we can get leadership organised in that way.
David, I did some research about 15 years ago with tourism operators about their understanding of sustainability. And what I found was that they'd go, economic sustainability, yeah, that's me and my business. Environmental, and they'd point to the nearest national park, and then they go, what was the other one? Which they were all doing, they just didn't identify it as such. The way that they identified sustainability was me and my personal sustainability, my health and other stuff. If I get that right and my relationship is right, then I can work on my business. And if I get that right, then I can work on the region. And I think what's happened over the past year with photos of bushfires, with huge acres of the country covered in smoke, with pictures of Sydney houses washing into the sea, has been that sustainability has suddenly become very personal. They can relate to these individuals whose health is being dramatically affected by climate change. And then all of a sudden, sustainability on a personal level becomes something that they can see and touch and feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know what people's thoughts are on what your own take on sustainability is and whether that relates.
It's interesting you say that, Alina. I had the same thing yesterday where I opened up a strategic plan and went, sustainability, that's really interesting. Started reading it and it was all about a business model. And to me, it took me a while to kind of connect the dots and go, hang on. Yeah, they're talking about the sustainability of that business. They're not talking about sustainability of the broader environmental context. So just interesting that you raise it at the same time as I've just been considering it.
Yeah.
Laura, in relation to what you were saying about the common ground with people that maybe have a different viewpoint on climate change, I've found that as a person from the UK coming to Australia, there's a real different viewpoint on how people view green initiatives, and a real hostility in Australia that I even now struggle to understand. It's a bit like the green movement represents, I don't know, an affront maybe to a certain lifestyle that's Australian, and I struggle to get my head around it. I don't know if anyone else can help me to understand that.
Yeah, it is interesting, that one. It's certainly, I think, bundled in with... we often have this because we live in a rural setting, and one of the most amusing contradictions I find is that people who live in rural settings often actually have adverse to city dwelling hippies. And yet they're the ones who are most directly impacted by climate change. So it's something that we actually explore a lot locally about how do we connect with our neighbours and still hold true to our values, but not ruin our relationships, because really community is one of the biggest parts of the surviving climate change and the impacts of it. So it's something we've really thought about quite a lot. And I think some of it all comes in the language, the perception, the politics of it. But like I was saying, when you get down to the core values, we love where we live and we want where we live to thrive. And so it's just talking about that and trying to cut all the noise. Also turning off Facebook, it's really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I won't belabor it, and I will share the video, but it's one of the, in Rebecca Costa's work, one of the things that, that starts to happen as civilizations reach the brink of collapse is that the people cling to beliefs over facts, right? So when you say coming off Facebook and that sort of thing, part of the reason for doing that is we know that it's very hard to determine, I guess the fake news and the false prophets from what's real. And that's a feature, and you can track that back historically across the collapse of different civilizations, that as complexity and chaos starts to take hold, people hang on to false beliefs. And they make up stories about why things are as they are, rather than dealing with the facts.
I have a question, David, and sort of a comment, and it really builds from what Joe was talking about, because I've just recently moved relatively recently to Australia, and then very recently to the region. And some of the conversations I hear are quite polarizing, but it's also about past actions. So the impact of past actions and people locally and people who are deeply involved with farming or with the environment, feeling that they're suffering from poor actions in the past. So you think about the arguments over water, over the Murray River. You think about arguments around whether bush forests should be cleared or not cleared, sort of old practices having been bureaucratized out, and then the impact of that being poor or being worse. So I think also there's a real challenge around people trusting actions and decisions that are being made, a lack of strong indicators that things have gotten better when decisions have been made under sort of a green or environmental management flag, and also a lack of ownership of those decisions. So I'm wondering and curious how you change that, and how you get past that.
Yeah, our view, and it's a great question, right? And our view of that is that one of the things we're not great at, and part of that is systems and policy and regulation, all that, is understanding that a decision made, say, 30 years ago, it might have been right in that moment, but is it necessarily right for now, right? And we're not very good at keeping an up-to-date view of what's going on in the world to say what of the past should we take forward, but what should we also release and think differently about what do we need to do in the future. And there was a comment made at the start about fuel loads, right? And I was chatting to one of the local CFA guys here in Wood End, and I think most people would be aware that the Ash Wednesday fire in 1983 was a major fire in Wood End. And I said, well, what's it like here, in the context of upcoming fire season? He said, well, the fuel load on the mountain is double what it was in 1983. And the reason for that, in his view, in simple terms, is when we protected the forest on Mount Macedon, we stopped letting people go in and collect fallen timber for fires, right? So there's nothing that's lessening the load. And it's like, to me, that's a very concrete example of what you're talking about, right? There's a protectionist movement for forests and good spirit without really understanding the whole system's implications, and how do we get people to understand that and think into what's a more sensible way to deal with, protect the forest, restore the environment, and live in tune with it in a way that doesn't become catastrophic if we don't sort it out. And I don't know, if we knew how to really have those conversations in a way to get cut through, particularly at the policy making level, we'd be doing it. But it's very hard to get people to listen, and to listen through the politics and the bureaucracy and all that sort of stuff. And it's objectively, it's the reason that, or part of the reason why someone like a Trump, despite his sort of personal whatever, gets hold in a place like America, which is much more badly broken than Australia could even imagine, because people look at that and they go, yeah, we do need less bureaucracy. We do need X, Y, and Z. And they don't understand, again, the whole system's implications of what he's doing. But that sort of narrative catches hold because people can see that what we were doing isn't working here. Somebody's going to change it. But it's a great question. Our view is that the change that we're going to need around this sort of stuff is going to happen in a more localized context. That's, for us, this is what's really exciting about a region coming together to say, how can we think more holistically and more strategically about the future of our region, right? The health of our people, the health of our industries and our businesses, the health of our communities. Because a network organized at a local level could be a real shining light for how you take something forward. And if we could, I don't know, over a couple of years, get a number of regions to be working sensibly at a local level, you can shift the game pretty quickly. But I don't think you can shift it by trying to get policy change as the only lever, without getting grassroots movement to create those shifts.
I just love the way that the government was saying renewable is never going to be a proper energy source for us. And at the very same time, Yak and Danda, a very small community, said we're going 100% renewable, and we've done it without any help, and we're going to be just fine, thank you. And I thought that was a great example of a community showing how it should be done. So yeah, I think you're right. I think we've got to just do it for ourselves, haven't we?
And there's the example also, I think it was last week in South Australia, for 1 hour, it was actually being run totally 100% on solar power. So there's these little things that are popping up. And just on the, I'm totally on board with the local, and that I know I've sort of worked on that from trying to affect change or trying to deal with things that are beyond the scope of my ability and capacity, and just going, I can do, this is what I can do. And from starting from that point of what I can do or what we can do, it starts getting bigger. But then at an international level, just recently was the phone call from Boris Johnson to the Prime Minister, which apparently the notion of needing to deal with the climate has been raised. So if there are regional, if there are smaller groups that can then leverage some of these larger conversations and apply pressure from both sides, we may start making a bit more change at that national level.
In some ways.
Go ahead, Laura. Go.
Sorry. I think that's sort of what democracy is. So I sort of see, I'm not saying I agree with it or disagree with it, but a democratic government does follow rather than lead in today's day and age at the moment. So they will go with the popular viewpoint, and they knowing that is how they will gather the greatest number of votes or nominations. And so we need to create mass change for a government to then follow and reflect what is the broader view. I think there's a lot of reliance sometimes on relying on a government to lead, and I just don't think in this current democratic environment that's going to be the case. They will represent the major populace, and so it's about creating that change from individual regional, as you're saying, David, up.
Yeah, that's right. And I think I would add to that, Laura, that I think we have to be very conscious of the fact that that system can be gamed by special interests as well, right? So a very concrete example of that in Victoria is the commercial seafood industry. And I don't know how much people would know or want to know about commercial seafood, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, apart from the prevailing narrative around commercial fishing is that it's a dirty industry, it's not environmentally friendly.